Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today I am joined by the wonderful Harper Kinsley, and we are going to be talking about disabled heroes and the fine line between overcoming something like personal hurdles or like temporary obstacles and such, and sort of quote, overcoming disability. This is a topic that I think is going to probably like differ depending on like who you talk to. So yeah, this video is not supposed to be any sort of concrete thing of like do this, don't do this. It's just yeah, two pals hanging out, having a conversation, critically thinking about this topic and sort of exploring what we each think and feel. So Harper, would you like to introduce yourself and tell people sort of like where they can find your work or what you've been doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm like really excited to be here and chat about this. I'm Harper. I use she, her pronouns. I am I'm a YA everything writer. I have a couple different things out right now. Some of my writing has been published in Artifice and Access, which I curated, and I most recently have a short story featured in Remnants of Relics, which has been, how do you say that? Was, has been, was?
I don't know,
Jake
is present tense?
is, is. Jake Vanguard did that one and it's really good.
Oh, nice.
And my debut novel, Spikes, Dice, and Other Variables, comes out next fall, and I'm super excited about that. And I am an ACE disabled author as well. I have a couple different disabilities. One of the biggest ones that I deal with is called Marfan syndrome. It is a connective tissue disorder that affects mainly the heart, but also affects the joints, eyes, lungs, pretty much everything as genetic disorders are tend to do. I also have a number of mental illness. So I have OCD, ADHD, PTSD, a couple other things, but those are the big ones. But yeah, that's me.
Yay, thank you for sort of doing the introduction of the self. I never know if like I should be the presenter and be like, "Oh, Harper is like XYZ," because I'm always like very excited, but yeah, I am extremely eager to talk about this topic with you. Um Also because yeah, like you were in Artifice and Access and we've like talked a couple of times and I just know that we're going to sort of go back and forth with some really good thoughts. So let's
Yeah.
start the conversation. And I think I would like to begin it first with a sort of like another acknowledgement or another sort of like caveat of sorts, and that is that we are kind of going into this conversation, right, with the understanding that there are indeed many times where disabled, chronically ill, or people with chronic pain will push through or, quote, overcome their symptoms in order to do things in the moment. So many people who are disabled and chronically ill or who have chronic pain will know and understand this kind of lifestyle because of the way that ableism and able body supremacy shapes our world and very much demands it of us. So, what we're talking about today specifically is how do we tell stories, I guess, that include some of these moments of overcoming, maybe, but don't ultimately push the sort of ableist narrative that disabled or chronically ill people can just or should just, like try harder and that everything will be fine. And, that that's how this works 100% of the time, I guess. So, yeah, one of the things that I think comes up in regards to this conversation a lot is, oh, well, I'm disabled and I have to push through all the time, so I don't have a problem with this. And it's like 100%. I completely understand the sort of like demand and the necessity of like overcoming because that's how this world is designed. It's not designed for disabled and chronically ill people like us. So we're not actually sort of condemning the entire concept of overcoming. It's just sort of like how do we balance the, I guess, like authenticity, right, of this expectation of overcoming with what ideology and understanding are we pushing about disability and chronic illness? And, what are we equating with heroism and what are we equating with, like success and things like that. So with that out of the
Yeah.
way, Harper, did you have anything to sort of like add before we?
Yeah, I
jump in?
was going to mention, yeah, so I think it's appropriate to mention that one of the reasons that I did initially ask about this topic was because of the short story that I wrote for Artifice and Access, which is basically about a lot of the hurdles that people have to go through in order to face healthcare systems that are often very unfair and very trying, and the way that we have to overcome, for lack of a better term, we have to overcome our situations in order to do the things that we have to do. And I remember writing this story and loving it and feeling like I was super excited. It's like it has a service dog. It's got magical prosthetics. It's got Marfan syndrome. And then I went, oh, wait, is this a problematic story? And I've kind of been wrestling with that. I love the story and I love everything about it. And I'm very proud of that story. And I have come, I've come to, I'm trying so hard not to say, so that's why I'm pausing a little bit.
You can say
I'm,
as much as you like, because I'm a chronic as well. So it's just part of the
it's
job, I feel like.
I'm trying so hard. I'm practicing. So I'm like, okay. So as I wrote this book, there were magical things, magical prosthetics. Service dog was very cool, but then I had this thought of, is it problematic? And I have come to a conclusion in my mind that works for me and my vision of the story. And in my mind, I do not see it as problematic. I can see where some other people might have differing views, and that's okay because ultimately we do all have different experiences, very unique experiences. And if my personal experience and my way of telling that experience does not work for you, that is 100% valid. And so I appreciate that you put those caveats out there that, um, it's all different. It's all different for everyone, and not everything is going to work for everyone.
Yeah, 100%. And like, I also feel like this is one of the sort of like complex things I think about, depicting a disabled experience, sorry, because everyone is different, right? Like, I have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And while a lot of my friends and the people I know who also have this condition, like we go through similar things, there are still a myriad of ways that our experiences differ. And I also feel like I'm going to say this poorly because I'm sort of thinking on my feet, but I do think that disabled authors should be able to sort of like depict experiences that they've had that aren't, that maybe don't feel super palatable or, like, I guess like particularly empowering or whatnot, because it like comes from a place of authenticity. And I understand that there are like a lot of complexities when it comes to depicting disability where it's like context changes, right? So this is like one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about is like, okay, we have like a lot of able-bodied heroes, right? Who overcoming is like a core part of their success story. It's like a core thing. And like, I guess like in a hero's journey and stuff like that, overcoming things is just sort of part of the expectation of storytelling. But it's like, okay, when we add disability into this, I think there are like different things we need to account for and also be sensitive to and understand. So we're not accidentally saying like, oh, all disabled people need to do is like grit their teeth and just push harder and then they can be like the rest of the world. And I feel like I'm kind of rambling on this topic a bit because it's like uh one of the sort of like difficulties, I guess, is this thing of like, how do we balance authentic, like representation and all of that sort of stuff with also making sure that we're not accidentally saying, disabled people should be able to live up to the standards of XYZ thing when that's not, like accessible. Um, so
Well, and I think in a way, like, it is important to write about those things because some of the times those can be such freeing moments for people, like feelings of loss, especially for somebody who may have been an able-bodied person going to using a mobility aid, being some kind of a loss of some kind of physical, some kind of disability, right? Um, and there is a lot of emotion with that. There's a lot of grief, there's a lot of processing, there's a lot of regret sometimes, there's a lot of shame there. And I think those are all really real emotions that we need to tap into because sometimes it's a beautiful thing. The disability community that we have created in the modern day is a beautiful thing. You know, it's very uplifting, it's very empowering, and those are all great. But sometimes when you feel really bad about the fact that you use a cane as a 30-year-old and you've never used one before in your life and you finally had to break down and get a cane, sometimes you just want someone to say, yeah, that sucks. Like, I'm sorry that you hurt all the time, you know, like, and not do the whole, oh, but it's okay because your cane is beautiful and it makes you, it's helpful and it helps your body. My cane is beautiful. It has ghosts on it and I love it. Um, and it does help me, but it's okay that there are still there's so many conflicting feelings. And I think a lot of times readers and authors tend to, I think that's part of it actually, is that readers and authors have this, we have this idea that a character can only feel one way about a thing. And if they have conflicting thoughts, or if they act or think a certain, like different ways, that's not, that doesn't make sense. I think in our brains sometimes, when the reality is we think things and do things that are completely contradictory to those thoughts all the time. We have multiple feelings about things all the time. My partner is a therapist, and he talks a lot about how especially anger, when we feel anger, it's most often it's fueled by another emotion. And we rarely feel just one emotion at any given time. So with that said, it makes sense that we would have multiple feelings. Like you can be appreciative of that mobility aid while also feeling a grief for what you once had.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like I guess like as you were talking, one of the thoughts that I had was it's kind of like the difference between I guess like having sympathy for and compassion for the thing versus I guess like saying that the thing is bad. And so like when it comes to mobility aids and stuff, like for me, I should technically wear a shoulder and a knee brace more often than I do, but I tend to choose not to wear them if I can get away with it because I'm like, I don't want to have to answer the questions that, come with walking around like I've just been in a car crash. Because I'm so quote young and healthy, what the hell am I doing with these things on my
Mhm.
body? Or you also have to contend with a bunch of other social stuff like anytime I've worn a mobility aid over the top of my clothing, especially in high school, that always invited scrutiny and like, oh, you're just wearing that, so everyone can see it and you just want attention. And it's sort of like, well, no, I actually need this to be able to walk, or I need this to be able to show up today because, if I have too many sick days from school, I'll actually get in trouble. And so there is like a lot of, like muddy emotions that go into using mobility aids, for example, that are like, okay, I understand that this is a tool that will give me some more independence and autonomy and will probably reduce my pain, after doing a day of errands. But also I have to contend with the fact that my entire life, people have like made it seem like an issue that, I need to use these tools. And so, let me see if I can sort of like explain my line of thinking here, like the difference between sort of sympathy and compassionate representation, right, of that experience versus saying, disabled people just need to try harder. And I think it's that like somewhere in the narrative, right? Like as much as you might be depicting a disabled person who is very maybe like resentful of being disabled or resentful of needing mobility aids and such, I think if it's rooted in a context of like, for example, this character has been brought up in a society that just loathes disability and sees it as a weakness and stuff, then it makes complete sense that the character will, sort of grit their teeth and push through and, like all of that sort of stuff. Um, but then also in saying that, I do personally, as a reader, feel like there needs to be some part of the narrative that is not only asking us to sympathize with that sort of like upbringing, right? And like understand that context, but also kind of recognize that this is internalized ableism. And so there's like
Yeah.
a second layer of sympathy, I guess. And that is like, sort of being like, okay, yes, this sucks, but also like there is nothing wrong with you. Like you are not a lesser person or a lesser being or whatnot than an able-bodied person. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, did I say
Yeah.
things?
No, you did. You did. It makes sense.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Okay. Yes. Yeah, one of the things that I wrote down, I think kind of along this point is when I was thinking about like things that I wanted to talk about is this idea of how do we write something that is both authentic and hopeful, I think, at the same time, right? Not shying away from, like you said, those nitty-gritty feelings and those the internalized ableism that we often feel, but also at the same time shining this light, this beautiful, empowering light that has touched so many of us within the disabled community. Um, you know, to reach out to other people and let them know that they're not alone, and also share those positive messages of you are more than your disability. Like your disability is part of you, um, and it is still a beautiful part of you, and it makes you part of the unique and beautiful person that you are. Um, and it's complicated. I think, it's there's so many parts of our whole beings that are complicated, and our disabilities make they're a large portion of us.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like I guess like one of the things that I'm thinking about right now is, in depicting this sort of like authentic disability or chronic illness experience. There's, I guess, like a question for me as I'm reading books that have like disability representation and stuff, is like, is everything in this book and everything in the writing kind of like, what is the message that I'm sort of taking away from this? And so I think in stories of overcoming, like especially in stories where the disabled or chronically ill person is the underdog, right? Or is in like a very physically taxing, demanding, like unfair situation, it makes complete sense that there will be some level of overcoming. Um, but I guess like for me as a reader, I'm always looking out for some sort of indication, either from the narration or from a secondary character or something that kind of challenges the assumption of like, I need to overcome this to be as good as everybody else. Because if the only message that exists within the text is, I need to keep pushing through and I need to grit my teeth and just bear it and I need to overcome this and be as good as, if not better than, all of the able-bodied people, then that's a problem, right? Like I
Yeah,
need some sort of indication as a reader that no, that is not actually the, sort of understanding of disability that is correct or that is, you know, rooted in like sympathy and empathy, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I kind of want to avoid using words like correct or incorrect because,
right.
like I don't want to be like, this is bad, this is good because I'm just one person.
Right.
But yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Because yeah, there is no correct versus incorrect. I don't think that's possible. I mean, I've seen that many times before where I had to get checked a little bit actually with the book I'm reading right now where I'm like, I don't know if I agree with that rep, but I just you have to sit there and go, well, maybe that's just not my experience with this, and that's okay. And I'm learning it, or I'm reading it to learn about someone else's experience in that case. And we all have it, we all experience different the we all experience different things in different ways. We all experience the same things in different ways. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like that's a really important sort of takeaway is like when we engage with stories and stuff, we are kind of, yeah, uh, I think it's like a really beautiful thing to look at it as like, okay, well, I'm reading somebody else's experience or I'm reading to understand, like this specific experience or circumstance or mindset or whatnot, rather than immediately kind of writing it off, I guess, as being bad. Which is like one of the reasons why I when I'm reading a book that I'm not enjoying or that I'm finding is, like it might be ableist or something like that. I'm always like, okay, I need to read this to the end, and I really need to take into account all of the context before I sort of come to my own conclusion about how I feel. Because yeah, like I think between like the beginning and the end of a book, there is like so much room for,
Yeah.
tackling all of the like complexities and the difficulties and stuff like that. And so I never want to sort of get halfway through a book and be like, oh, well, this disabled character just wants to be cured, and I find that, bad and like valid.
Yeah.
I do think it's okay to be uncomfortable with that because that's a narrative that we've been, you know, sort of forced to, engage with all the time. But I am very much like, okay, I need to see this through to the end to like really understand what is driving this desire for a cure, and also, where, from what perspective is this author writing? And, like there's a bunch of things that I think, yeah, like affect the context and like affect whether or like how comfortable I guess I feel, like as a consumer. Um, but yeah, like I always want to leave room for the fact that this is a disabled, I mean, if the author is disabled, for example, or chronically ill, right? Like this is a perspective from, like a human being, and I would like to respect that. And so, yeah, I
Yeah.
used to be a big disliker of the cure narrative because I was like, I'm sick of this. I hate it. Like, and like I think my exhaustion with it is completely valid, but also I have since then also come around and been like, I actually think it's, valid for a disabled author, for example, to, engage with that
Yeah.
narrative. Because also, as someone who has like chronic pain and chronic migraines and stuff, I can't lie. There are a lot of moments in my life where I'm like, damn, I wish someone would just like give me a magic potion and then I could be
Me
cured.
too.
Like,
Me too.
and then I'm like, oh my
As
God, am I a terrible disabled person because I'm like wishing for a cure? But it's like, this is the difference, right? Is like the difference between, I guess, like just wanting a cure blanket, no sort of nuance or context or whatnot. And I guess like when you're someone who has chronic pain, right? It's sort of like a cure to suffering, but not all disability and chronic illness is suffering. Yeah, but that feels like a tangent that I could go on.
no, I totally get what you're saying. I think it's not selfish to wish that you did not have certain struggles in your life. I
Yeah,
don't think that is selfish.
yeah, 100%.
I have sort of a conclusion-y thing
Yep.
because I came with a concluding thought. So yes, I can kind of I don't know. Do you have anything else that you want to say specifically
Um,
besides the 2 hour rant?
Besides the 2 hour rant, okay, I feel like maybe before we like talk about other things related to it, I kind of feel like I want to ask, I mean, like we've already kind of touched on it a bit, but do you have any like specific thoughts about, you know, when an overcoming narrative or an overcoming depiction, is sort of like something that you don't feel like is like inclusive slash good slash, whatever else, versus when it is. I've asked this question really poorly. I feel like I need to start again.
No. Okay, yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Okay. I want to ask you if you have any, because I guess what we're talking about, right, is like sort of like the line between overcoming authentic overcoming, I guess, stuff versus, something that might be a little bit less authentic or might still be authentic, I guess, but still, like isn't exactly the most inclusive narrative or, like doesn't do anything to sort of challenge the demand to overcome. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on sort of like the differences?
I think for me, the biggest difference for me when it feels authentic, it feels like the choice to have a disabled character was not an afterthought, or if it was sort of a thing that came to the author, the writer, that it was one of those things that they wanted to sit down and take their time with it. And for me personally, I just really like to see a character fully dealing with all of the feelings that they have and not just one particular feeling. It's not just a well, this holds me back, so I need to be stronger, or this is something that I have to deal with. Like having those multiple complex thoughts, I think that does add to the authenticity. Um, Whereas if it only comes up at specific times, or if it's only mentioned a few times throughout the book, kind of thing, I think that's when it starts to sort of feel like it was almost an afterthought. And I'm not trying to say that every author who has done that has that intention. That's not what I'm trying to say at all, because I understand for some people it's not going to be a bigger part of the plot, and that is okay as well if you do not want to make that a larger part of your plot. Not all disabilities have to be inherently tied to the plot, but I enjoy the disabled characters that I have enjoyed seeing in the past are characters who sort of fully embrace their identity as a disabled person and what that does mean for them. And yeah, having those conflicting feelings, those feelings of joy and those feelings of, oh my gosh, I wish I didn't have a flare-up day. And oh, that's so nice that my friends carry applesauce pouches on them because I'm diabetic and I need sugar on me at all times. Like having it's making it real, pulling from all the ups and all the downs and allowing yourself to experience the full spectrum of the disabled experience.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And like, especially when you mention like the ups and the downs, right? Like that immediately made me think about how, like the times that I, as a reader, have specifically sort of taken an issue with, like the depiction of, like an overcoming narrative of sorts is specifically when there are only, like, it's when the ups and downs feel like they are in service of a specific message, and that message is, yes, if you just try harder, you will succeed and you will gain a seat at the table. And like there is no criticizing of or like problematizing the fact that the table was excluding them in the first place. And yeah, so I feel like just speaking about ups and downs, right? One of the concepts that I sort of am obsessed with and are always thinking about is this idea of toxic perseverance. And I defined that as the unhealthy persistence of doing something that is detrimental to oneself and one's body. And so I think I don't have any issue with chronically ill or disabled people needing to overcome things throughout a narrative because I feel like that's just realistic. However, I feel like when there are no consequences of that, or when nobody is really thinking critically of the fact that this is a demand placed on them, then I'm kind of like, okay, I feel like what's being said here is like, oh yeah, if only the disabled person tried harder, things would be great. And I'm like, but no, like from personal experience, when I've had to quote, just try harder, I actually ended up injured and I ended up more disabled. And like my capacity for physical activity was greatly diminished and, all of that sort of
Mhm.
stuff. So I do think it needs to be kind of like balanced of, if a disabled character is put into a situation where they do have to grit their teeth and try much harder than everybody else, and then it's not that they have to fail or anything like that. They can still 100% succeed, and we can celebrate the fact that they've just overcome this horrible situation. But I do think for me as a reader, that is when I am then looking for that embodied experience of like, okay, well, I had to really push myself today. I really need like a 2 hour long hot bath. Um, or, I need some drugs or whatever it might be to kind of really, yeah, like actually engage with, the fact that this thing has happened and that there has been this horrible demand on someone's body. Um, and yeah,
Like
also
showing
in
the
terms,
consequences.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And like the other thing is too, like, I guess like is everybody in the world being like, yeah, you just have to push harder. And like, if everybody around you as a disabled person, like I have had groups of friends who didn't believe I was disabled or who thought I could just try harder. I've, had medical certificates handed in at school saying, no, I cannot run the 3 kilometer, whatever, like racetrack or whatever that we do once a year for some
Me
reason.
too.
Yeah. And this is a thing I will never forget. and like I bring it up at least once a year. But I had a very terrible time at high school, like with the physical stuff, right? Because we would have mandatory PE lessons. And I was constantly like, every time I do a PE lesson, like I end up in horrible pain. And it doesn't just last till the end of the day. This is like a 3 to 4 day thing where I'm like, my mobility is greatly impacted and no one understands this. And I ended up crying to my sports teacher because I was like, I want to be able to do these things. Like, I want to be able to live up to your expectations, but I physically cannot. And I ended up giving her like a note from my specialist actually saying, like, no, I cannot run this, obstacle course essentially. Um, it's bad for me. And instead of being like, okay, yeah, you don't have to run it, like hang out on the field or whatever, she was like, oh, I'll run with you. And I was like, I don't think you holding my hand is going to change the fact that physically on like a DNA level, I do not have the kind of body that is able to just like run 3 kilometers and be fine afterwards. And I was honestly like in shock. And she kept saying it. And then she started to run. And I was like, I will walk the course, but I'm not running it because I know what the consequences will be. And so like my point in sharing this story is like when you are surrounded by people who are constantly saying things like, "Oh, I'll just run with you." Like, I'll do it with you. Come on. As if the problem is the fact that you don't want to do it alone rather than like, "No, I actually don't have the physical capacity." That like does something in your brain. And the
Yeah.
character or the person is definitely going to have a reaction to this of like, why is everybody holding me to an expectation that they know I can't meet? Or I'm really resentful of the fact that this is an expectation in the first place, or whatnot. Like I'm as a reader looking for that embodied experience of like very actively sort of engaging with and reacting to, this, yeah, demand to overcome, I guess, is my
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. And I think sort of dovetailing off of that, like I think part of it too, I think one of the things that we can do sort of with the overcoming the disabled heroes, I think another thing that we can do is also write good examples of disabled al or abled allies for the disabled community, right? Are you that type of person that I'm currently writing a story with a main character who has chronic migraines. And there are a few times, like every time she comes home, the main character comes home, like her parents are there with like water and beds, and they're always like, here, here, here. And she's like, no, like it's okay. And like they'll listen to her and go, okay, like I just want to make sure that you are, taking care of yourself. And then they leave it, showing this is how you can take care of us is frankly just by listening. The bar is literally on the floor. But those small things, right? Like, being willing to help out, but not overstepping. And I don't know. I was always that mom friend, so maybe this also just kind of like stems from my like personal like neuroticness of having like band-aids and Aleve and Neosporin and I don't know, everything on me at all times because I'm like, oh, like I don't know when I'm gonna fall and break an ankle. So like, I don't know, here's my whole ace bandage. Do you need this? I know how to wrap it up for you. Like, um but just being willing to listen and take care, not take care of, that's not the right word. Being able to listen and assist and support disabled people where it's needed.
Yeah, I feel like this is sort of touching on this sort of like idea of individualism versus collectivism, right? Where I think in our very individualistic culture, and our very like able-bodied culture, individualism teaches us to strive for individual solutions. So, it in this context, it makes a lot of sense that our individualist culture creates a lot of stories that present disability as one person's issue and not at all a systemic one. And so I think in like a lot of ways, this is also maybe why overcoming narratives um, might feel empowering or inspiring to some disabled and non-disabled consumers, right? It's because it's like, oh, here is this person who, by default has a harder time than everybody else, and they are overcoming that to succeed. And like I 100% understand that. But I'm also very critical of this idea of like, oh, the disabled person just needs to try harder because then it kind of presents their disability as the obstacle they need to overcome, instead of being like, actually, this world having these expectations to begin with is quite unfair. And actually, there are, a whole host of things that this person's friends can do to help them have an easier time, I guess, or even just like show that they care, right? And that's what I personally want as a reader, is to have, like more people kind of be like, okay, yeah, like I don't want to sound like I'm tooting my own horn, but I am also like really excited and sort of like proud of what I'm trying to do, I guess. But in the book that I'm currently writing, one of the difficulties that my protagonist faces is this constant demand to overcome because of the environment that she's in. And at a certain point, like this really comes to bite her in the ass, basically, this like constant like internalized ableism push, right? Like she's very much like, I have to just grit my teeth and do it because if I don't, there'll be trouble, or I'll fail and failing is bad. And it all kind of comes to a head. And then she and her friends kind of have this critical conversation about the fact that, like, oh, it's not just her who like assumed, this sort of internalized ableism expectation thing. It's like also her friends, because all of her friends, despite knowing that she's disabled and understanding that she has different access needs, none of them were really changing the way that they were thinking or changing the way that they were approaching solutions. And so she was constantly being, that mindset was being reinforced because everybody is doing things one way. And so she is constantly trying to participate in that. Um, and yeah, so I feel like overcoming and having like lots of different, I guess, like having different perspectives, right? And then also having like people challenge it in different ways, or having people be like, even just like a throwaway line of like, it really sucks that you have to do this. I would be pretty much okay with that as a reader, because I'm like, okay, at least we're presenting part of the problem as the, I guess, like the world around them or like the system, right? It's not um like it can't sort of be taken as like saying that disabled people have to, push themselves harder. But yeah, again, like we mentioned consequences and stuff, and I feel like that's important too. So there are like a lot of ways that I feel like
Yeah.
overcoming narratives can be presented in ways that are, like compassionate first and foremost, I guess, is my thing.
Yeah, it's like that acknowledging that there are things that disabled people have to do while also acknowledging the fact that they should not have to do that. Those things should all like accessibility should already be in place for everybody, right? The universal design for I go back to universal design for learning because I am also an educator, and that was how universal design was initially um that's how I initially learned about it. But this idea of universal design, it's better for everybody. That's this idea. And as we try to move towards a more universal design for the whole world, we're just going to find that everybody benefits from this. And that's yeah. So like I said, like acknowledging that things shouldn't be this way, but understanding that they are at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. That made me have a thought, and then I got really excited to say the thought, and then I feel like I kind of forgot the thought.
We
Yep,
could talk about this for a really long time.
we really could. And like, I guess what I'm kind of thinking of is like, yeah, how important it is to situate the problem or like part of the problem outside of the body. So, um how do I like articulate this in words that make sense? So I guess like we're talking about societal prejudice, right? And also like the way that the world is built. And so I think if an overcoming narrative or whatever rests on this idea that, oh, just overcoming prejudice will improve the quality of your life and increase opportunities for you and stuff like that, I think that that's sort of like potentially problematic, because success is being primarily achieved through being able-bodied or like assimilating toward non-disabled expectations. And maybe it's also something to do with like the idea of just trying harder versus like trying differently. And related to this, I also have a lot of feelings because I've read several books like this that like kind of annoyed me to my core. Just me personally, not saying these stories are bad or whatnot, but this idea of trying harder versus trying differently. Some authors, in an attempt to have the disabled characters try differently, will actually have them try differently and harder at the same time. And so it's like, oh, running this obstacle course is like really difficult to me. A person who has like joint issues and dislocated their knee. And then instead of it being like, trying differently so they don't have to run or so they don't have to, I don't know, push themselves harder than a non-disabled person, the solution will actually be way more physically taxing. So what we end up with is a narrative where the disabled person actually had to exert much more effort than a non-disabled person. And so it's like the idea I have in my head then, or my takeaway is like, oh yeah, if the disabled person just tries harder, then they can just like outperform the non-disabled people. And so nothing about the system needs to change because they've successfully assimilated. And, there is no I guess like problematizing of the fact that they had to do it in the first place. It turns out I have a lot to complain about when it comes to overcoming narratives, because I guess I'm just a little bit salty and like sick of them being like, ugh, if
Well,
I could just ramble. But I guess I'm thinking of like empowerment and like power fantasies, because I think disabled people, mentally ill
yes.
people 100% deserve power fantasies and all of that sort of stuff. And I so badly want to have that takeaway from a lot of these stories, but what ends up happening is I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel like a power fantasy to me. It feels like my worst nightmare because I've lived that reality where I had to try harder and I ended up more disabled and abandoned by the medical system and all of that sort of stuff. So I guess I like, yeah, that's one of my struggles as a reader is sort of, do I need to suspend my disbelief in that area, or is it okay that I'm critical? Um, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't know. I feel like this is I mean, this whole idea of the overcoming narrative and the disabled heroes, like I feel like this is going to be this isn't it's not a debate. It's a conversation, right? I think that's the biggest part of it is that everyone is going to have something to add to the table, and if you're watching this right now, if you're listening, you're like, those two have no idea what they're talking about. Like, no, this is wrong and everything they're saying is wrong. I disagree. Like, that's great. You should like tell your truth. And also at the same time, if you are sitting there and you're like, well, they just contradicted themselves like 5 or 6 times. Yeah, we probably did. It's a lot of these it's such a complex topic, right? Because, there's no rules. There's no rules about any of this stuff. There's no right way to write disability. There's no right way to write empowerment. And for some people, it's going to be that, I just need to see empowerment for me is seeing a really realistic experience that I can relate to and knowing that I'm going to get out okay in the end. For some people, it's knowing that I can do more than I expected of myself and knowing that I can achieve those higher goals by, changing what I'm doing something different. And, for some people, yeah, like for some people, it's just knowing that there are people that love them and that support and that love is enough, and loving themselves is enough, and overcoming that internalized ableism is enough. Yeah, there's no hard and fast rule book. Like if there was, then every single story would be cut and paste and it would be the exact same story. And wow, what a boring world that would be, right? Like I think
I
this is, oh yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I feel like you said that all really well, and I completely agree. And like, this is just, I feel like this is really reflective of the fact that this is such like a nuanced topic, and also it's like very complex because, again, like disabled people are not a monolith, and so you can have 20 disabled people in a room, sort of writing stories, and every single one of those stories will be different. Um, and what the authors believe about disability will be different, and what authors or like what each individual sees as an empowering story will also be different. Because yeah, like I 100% see the value in like I guess like suspending one's disbelief and being like, oh, cool, we have this kick-ass, disabled protagonist who is, I don't know, killing people, doing cool shit, like, I don't know, whatever the kids are into these days, I say as a 28-year-old. Yeah, like sure, I feel like
Right.
I'm rambling
Eh,
now, but it's like, I want to
No,
be
it's
happy, but yeah,
sometimes we need that. Sometimes we need to see that, there that sometimes you need to see that the person with the disability can also go on the big quest and do the things and fight the dragons and slay the monsters and, be be the warrior. But like sometimes you also just need to know that sometimes life is a big enough monster in itself. Living is scary enough as it is. And again, sometimes you just need that little moment of it's gonna be okay. This
yeah,
actually really I was gonna say this really leads well into this like final thought typey thing that would sum it up if you want me to.
yes, please.
Okay. So I think when I was writing all of these notes down, I kind of had this thought come to me. And I think ultimately writing disabled heroes is about learning to love the disabled experience for what it is, and not love as in enjoy, but love as in to embrace wholeheartedly, to see all sides of it and to acknowledge that there are so many different facets to the disabled experience, and to be willing to explore and to know all of those different areas and just learn, do more, and keep living that experience to your most true and authentic self.
I could not agree more. And I feel like, yeah, you put that really, really well. And I know that you said it's like a kind of concluding thought. Um, However, it did like prompt me to have another thought.
Yes, let's
Um,
go. Yes, Monarch.
I guess like now I'm kind of thinking about the like concept of or like the term inspiration porn, right? Um,
Hmm.
so if like people are not really familiar with the like origins of this term, it was coined by disability activist Stella Young. And it's something that I think about a lot when it comes to the overcoming narrative, because I think, the moments where it starts to feel a little bit uncomfortable for me personally as a reader is when I feel like it is kind of crossing over into this like inspiration porn version of disability. So again, like yes, I want to say disabled and chronically ill people absolutely 100% deserve to be inspired and have fun power fantasies just like anybody else. And I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is when, or a potential problem, I should say, is when the narrative is written in a way that presents disability as like the problem to be solved, but also like disability in some way must be transcended in order to be inspiring. So what I mean by that and the ways that it sort of like links up with inspiration porn is like if the character is like I guess like physically pushing themselves all the time to like overcome, like physical obstacles and things like that. And then it's like, oh yeah, because of their ability to sort of transcend their pain, to shelve their pain or, kind of ignore it or, push through injury and stuff. If that is the thing that is being celebrated, then I'm kind of like, ooh, maybe this is kind of pushing more in towards that inspiration porn territory and also like the sort of able-bodied supremacist idea of like you should be doing things the able-bodied way. Um, but because we're sort of talking about the difference or like how to straddle that line. And so I think this is yeah, sort of something to keep in mind is like, oh no, am I kind of presenting the transcending of disability or symptoms or pain as the thing as the goal versus like, I don't know, inclusion or, people giving a shit that someone is disabled or has different access needs. And I just kind of want to quickly add that, like, because we're talking about power fantasies and stuff, my the position that I've sort of come around to is like my version of like a power fantasy can definitely include like the kickassery and like being a badass and all of that sort of stuff. But the true empowerment lies in like, does the disabled person or chronically ill person have a support network? Like, do they have mobility aids? Do they have all of the things that actually they would logically need to live a full, like life and stuff? Because, yeah, I think like that's also an important aspect, because overcoming prejudice and stuff, like, yes, it probably will improve things for you, but also that's not the only facet of disability, that
Yeah.
sort of leads to difficulty or exclusion and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Zoom again is like you have 10 minutes. I think like that is basically like all of my notes, but did you have like any stray thread thoughts or anything to add that maybe didn't
I,
come up naturally in the conversation?
no, I think that's, yeah. I mean, yeah. I got everything. I said a lot of thoughts.
You did indeed say a lot of thoughts. I feel like
It's
we all
Harper.
did very well.
Harper has thoughts today.
It is Harper has thoughts today. Oh, I love that so much. But yeah, I feel like this is like such a fascinating topic to me. And I will also add, like, I'm sure it's become apparent throughout this like recording that I am someone who is fairly critical of like overcoming narratives because I'm kind of just like sick of seeing them. I feel like just as like my stray thread thought, I feel like overcoming narratives are very much one of the, like few acceptable disability narratives that we have that non-disabled people are comfortable with. And I would encourage people to maybe ask why that is, because I think that bears thinking about. But yeah, I also want to be clear. I feel like there's a lot of merit, and a lot of value to be found in, like stories of overcoming. So I don't want to sound like I'm discounting them. But yeah, there's just a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff to be mindful of, I guess, as with
Yeah.
anything.
I agree. Especially when you are writing in a marginalized area, right? I mean, this is this is not a topic that is exclusive to the disabled community. I think marginalized groups of many, many different varieties deal with a similar sort of situation.
Yeah, 100%. I guess also to me, it's like just allowing for that variation in experience and, um, yeah, I guess like making room for people doing things differently or having different needs or valuing different things. I don't know. This topic is so big and exciting. It's like I feel like I'm on the threshold of we could talk for another 3 hours. And so I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't want to like bring up the rest of my thoughts. Um, but
You could
yeah,
write a
this has been
dissertation. It's fine.
okay.
Just write a
So
whole
like
dissertation.
actually the thing is, I did start a a dissertation. Like I'm not part of an academic body anymore. Like I've fully left
Hmm.
university. However, because I'm insufferable, even to myself, I do actually have a dissertation in the works, which I don't know what I'll do with because I'm talking about real life books, right? And like as an author, I think we do need to be there is kind of an expectation that we be really careful how we speak about,
Right.
our colleagues or whatnot. However, this is like it's not about like criticizing an author. It's about like exploring this very fascinating topic that has
Yes.
become very much a special interest to me. So I called it, I think, a court of overcoming and heroism because I'm kind of
Oh, I
focusing
love
on
that.
like fantasy,
Yeah.
depictions of like overcoming and stuff and what we're equating with heroism and stuff and how that might differ when the protagonist is disabled and stuff. So like we joke about writing a dissertation, but I'm like, oh, yeah,
You're
I'm
like,
not doing
uh-huh,
that.
yeah, hilarious. But what if?
Yeah, it would be so wild if somebody did that. I don't know who would do that. Not me,
So
certainly.
strange.
Yeah,
So strange.
yeah, I would never.
I would
That's why
never.
this conversation is like a very good, palatable hour and a half long. We had the
It's fine,
normal
it's
amount of
fine.
thoughts.
Yeah, the normal amount.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in that case, you have exactly 3 minutes and 50 seconds to tell people where to find you if you like.
Okay, well, thank you for having me to
Of
chat
course.
today, first of all. I appreciate it. So I am mostly on Instagram, at Harper Kinsley Author. That is the best place to find me. Don't go looking for me anywhere else. I don't check anything else. So, again, I am in Artifice and Access. I am in Remnants of Relics, and my debut is coming out next year in fall through Inked and Gray Press, and I think it's a delightful book. Um, yeah,
All
that's
right.
that's what I got.
I will make sure to have all of the links to your socials and the
I have a
books and stuff.
Substack too.
Oh yeah, you do.
I
Okay, I'll
forget.
also
I
link
get
that.
Yes. I'm also on Substack. I forgot about that. I also have a Substack. So if you want updates, you can subscribe to that as well.
Perfect. Okay, well, all of the links and everything will be in the description box underneath the video. And yeah, I really encourage everyone to, I guess, like, I would be really curious to know what everyone's thoughts and feelings are, like on this topic or uh in relation to this discussion even. Like, I would actually be really curious. Even if you want to leave a comment like, "Oh my God, I completely disagree with you," then I can be like, "Okay, let's dig in.
Yes.
Like, let's see." Because I
Yeah.
would I would obviously love to consider other perspectives. But yeah, thank you so much for having this conversation with me and being willing to film a recording and all of that sort of stuff. It's been really fun.
Yeah, this was so fun. Thank you.
Of course, let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, right now.
Okay, get strapped in for part 3.
Okay. Part three.